The freak-offs from the Sean Diddy Combs criminal case are back in the news in a very big way. So we thought, let's provide you a bit of some updates when it comes to these alleged illegal sexual encounters. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. It is time once again to talk about the infamous freak-offs. These are at the center of Sean Combs' federal criminal case out of the Southern District of New York, where he faces charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking through force, fraud, and coercion of victim 1, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Trial currently scheduled for May 5th, 2025. I want to go back to the indictment because this is really where it centers upon it. So it alleges that Sean Combs and other members and associates of the Combs enterprise wielded the power and prestige of Combs' role at the Combs business to intimidate, threaten, and lure female victims into Combs' orbit, often under the pretense of a romantic relationship. Combs then used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sex acts with male commercial sex workers that Combs referred to as, among other things, freak-offs. Freak-offs were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, pleasured himself during, and often electronically recorded. In arranging these freak-offs, Combs, with the assistance of members and associates of the Combs enterprise, transported and caused to be transported commercial sex workers across state lines and internationally. Freak-offs occurred regularly, sometimes lasted multiple days, and often involved multiple commercial sex workers. During freak-offs, Combs distributed a variety of controlled substances to victims, in part to keep the victims obedient and compliant. Sometimes, unbeknownst to the victims, Combs kept videos he filmed of victims engaging in sex acts with commercial sex workers. After freak-offs, Combs and the victims typically received IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use. And let's not forget that prosecutors allege that these freak-offs weren't just happening years and years ago. In one of their letters to the court, they wrote, "Indeed, since at least in or about January 2024, when the defendant was unquestionably aware of the criminal investigation, the evidence shows that he is engaged in multiple freak-offs, some involving the interstate transportation of individuals to participate, has continued to use narcotics, and has contacted multiple witnesses." Now, I think there's a fair argument to say that Sean Combs' defense counsel isn't going to shy away from the term freak-off. They might accept, yeah, Sean Combs called these sexual encounters freak-offs. Yeah, they weren't with commercial sex workers, but maybe it was group sex, or maybe it was things that were filmed with him and a partner of his, but doesn't make it illegal. The way it becomes illegal is if you do bring in these sex workers, if there is some sort of force or fraud or coercion that is used, or there are narcotics that are used, and this idea that it wasn't on the up and up. But I think they're going to say it might be different from what you and I do, but it's not necessarily illegal. I want you to keep that in mind. And obviously, as you heard there are elements to the racketeering charge, this kind of idea that there was a criminal enterprise that engaged in all sorts of illegal activity. Sean Combs was leading it. The sex trafficking, again, you particularly moving people across state lines for commercial sex acts. There has to be an element of fraud or force or coercion. By the way, we want to keep on bringing you these Sean Combs updates, and for that, I gotta thank our sponsor, Upside. Their support helps make this happen, and Upside's great. It is a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries, food. This is actual real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you transfer right into your bank account. Look here, I used Upside when I went to Dig for lunch, which, by the way, delightful. Delightful. Anyways, I claimed an offer for Dig on the app, paid as usual using a card, followed the steps on the app. I got cash back. It is so easy. I got 20% cash back. That's insane. And aside from Dig, you can also use it at places like, Shell, 7-Eleven, Taco Bell. It's just to name a few. So to find out how much you can earn, you click the link in the description to download Upside, or you scan the QR code on screen. But make sure to use our promo code SIDEBAR because you get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Combs' attorneys filed a letter asking Judge Arun Subramanian, this is the judge in the Southern District of New York who is overseeing this case, they are asking him to order the prosecution to electronically produce videos of the freak-offs to the defense. And the reason they want these electronically produced, the reason they want copies of these in their possession to review and analyze, and why they need the court to step in, is because they say that under the current protective order in this case regarding how evidence will be viewed and disseminated, The video evidence is available for inspection only, right? They have to go to a certain place provided by the prosecution in order to view these videos. They say that's not fair. And according to the defense, the federal prosecutors refuse to produce over these videos to them. But more importantly, and this is the key, Combs' lawyers write, we need these videos because they prove our client is innocent. Quote, having reviewed these videos, it is now abundantly clear that they confirm Mr. Combs' innocence and that their full exculpatory value cannot be investigated and used unless they are electronically produced. The 9 videos at issue are the so-called freak-off tapes with victim 1 that the government has repeatedly referenced, causing wild speculation in the media. Contrary to what the government has led this court and the public to believe, the so-called freak-offs were private sexual activity between fully consenting adults in a long-term relationship. Like many Americans in the privacy of their own bedrooms, they sometimes filmed their sexual activity. These videos unambiguously show that the person alleged in the indictment to be victim 1 not only consented but thoroughly enjoyed herself. And we believe victim 1 to be Cassandra Ventura. This is Diddy's ex, who first filed that initial sexual assault lawsuit against Combs back in 2023. She was also in that infamous surveillance footage that was published by CNN months ago, where you see Sean Combs in a towel beating Cassandra Ventura, dragging her, kicking her. The filing goes on to say, quote, moreover, contrary to innumerable sensationalistic media reports, the videos do not depict sex parties. There are no secret cameras, no orgies, no other celebrities involved, no underground tunnels, no minors, and not so much of a hint of coercion or violence. So not only talking about the allegations in the indictment, but also all of the claims that have been made in the media as well. Now, far from the government's lurid descriptions, the videos show adults having consensual sex, plain and simple. At bottom, this case is about whether victim 1 was or was not a willing participant in her private sex life with Mr. Combs. The videos confirm that she plainly was. And the defense in this letter describes victim 1 in these videos as, quote, happy, dominant, and completely in control. They write, there is no evidence of any violence, coercion, threats, or manipulation whatsoever. There's no evidence that anyone is incapacitated or under the influence of drugs or excessive alcohol consumption. There is certainly no evidence of sex trafficking. That's what they say. They go on to write, the premise that freak-offs are inherently dangerous shows that the government seeks to police non-conforming sexual activity and that it assumes, despite all evidence to the contrary, that a woman's willing participation must have been coerced. So again, that idea of doesn't seem like they're shying away from these freak-offs, but saying, while the freak-offs might be unusual, they're not illegal. Now, the defense also says that they reviewed photographs that they say victim 1 allegedly sent to Sean Combs, and they too appear in their characterization, quote, to reflect entirely consensual sexual activity. And the defense also claims in this letter that these recordings corroborate what witnesses have told the government. And they don't really explain more about that, but that seems to suggest that these witnesses are going to be helpful to Sean Combs' defense. Maybe these are sex workers who were there and say, look, our opinion, Cassie consented to everything that was going on, or victim 1 consented to everything that was going on. Now, we actually spoke with criminal defense attorney Bradford Cohen about this, and he's represented celebrities like Drake, Lil Wayne, Kodak Black. And the question is, based on the defense's characterization, is this the end of the prosecution's case, right? Do these videos prove that Sean Combs is innocent? Is there anything more? Take a look.
I think it's interesting because, from the very beginning of this case, I was saying, I think that the original tape showing the violence against Cassie, I think the original tape was leaked by her team to show that she is a victim and not a willing participant or a co-defendant. So I've been saying that for a long time. So to hear this, that, okay, we've seen these 9 videotapes, and these 9 videotapes kind of back up what we've been saying the whole time, that it's consensual sex between adults. It's an interesting thing to say, because I think that the videotapes are going to show that Cassie probably was engaging with another individual. The videotapes are probably going to show that it wasn't a hidden camera, maybe that she was making faces or saying something to the camera that confirms that it wasn't a hidden camera or someone's talking on camera. all those different things definitely help his case. Is it a smoking gun, as we say? No, probably not a smoking gun, because she's going to still say, listen, I was still under the control of Sean Combs. He was physically controlling me. He was mentally controlling me. That's going to be where she goes with this whole thing. And that's where that tape of violence comes in to show that, yeah, it might have looked like I was doing these things on video, that I was a willing participant. But in reality, I knew if I was not a willing participant, then something else would have happened to me physically or mentally.
Now, you might be saying, well, look, the fact that the tapes exist, Jesse, that shows that Sean Combs is guilty, because the government alleges he secretly filmed these encounters and used it to blackmail victim one to stay silent, to do what he wanted. The defense, to do what he wanted. Well, the defense has an answer to that in their letter. They write, these recordings were not on Mr. Combs' devices and were not seized from his homes. Rather, victim one kept these videos on her own device for years and produced them to the government herself. Now, Bradford also had an interesting take on that as well.
If the defense had these tapes, or Sean Combs had these tapes, when the tape came out, or when the accusations came out that she was not a willing participant in this sex, you don't think those tapes would have been leaked? Like,
well, he would have gotten in a lot of trouble if he did that, right?
Well, before the charges were even filed, when she said, when she first hit him with the civil complaint, and in that civil complaint says she was not a willing participant, she was not involved in these things, all these different kind of accusations in that civil complaint, you would at that point say, what are you talking about?
He settled with her the next day. And if you're him, I don't want to release these videos of me, my private sex life. He probably didn't want to.
No, but there's a way you could leak it to make sure her version of events was questioned.
Now, in terms of the defense's argument for why they are entitled to electronic production copies of these videos, they argue that this is a form of exculpatory evidence covered under what we call in the law Brady, that the government has to turn over, that Combs has a constitutional right to properly prepare for his defense. He has a due process right. That's why he should have it. And they also cite the federal rules of criminal procedure, specifically Rule 16, which states in part, upon a defendant's request, the government must permit the defendant to inspect and to copy data that is within the government's possession, custody, or control, and that is material to preparing the defense. And here they argue that videos of the freak-offs, they are material because that's essentially the prosecution's central point in this case, the freak-offs. And they argue the government has not presented enough evidence to withhold the videos because this is not child pornography. This is not classified information. Now, the prosecution responded in a letter of their own to the court, and they didn't directly respond to the Rule 16 argument or what the tapes show, but they argued that the defense's letter violated the protective order that has been put in place by the court. That under the protective order, that no portion of the videos should have been filed on the public docket without being filed under seal or without the defense first conferring with the government as to the designation. And they said neither occurred. Quote, instead of conferring in advance or redacting all content related to the videos, the motion blatantly violated the protective order when it left unredacted descriptions and characterizations of material designated AEO, attorney's eyes only. And they argue this threatens the privacy of victims, and they are asking the court to remove it from the public filing and have it be refiled with redactions. Well, the defense responded to that in a follow-up letter, and they said, look, we will make the requested redactions, but they want the court to step in. And they want to be able to refile this with narrower redactions. Why? Because they argue that the government's request was way too overbroad, that the government, they already told everybody what all of this is about, that they have been quite explicit and specific about freak-offs. And they also argue that there is a presumption of public access here. This is about the government's key piece of evidence in this case, the freak-offs, and that Mr. Combs' trial rights are being compromised by not having proper access to this material. They write, indeed, the public can only have confidence in the conscientiousness, reasonableness, or honesty of judicial proceedings if the documents on which judges rely are publicly available. And they say the government provides no satisfactory or adequate reason for why this information needs to be sealed. And I want to read you this part in its entirety because I think this is really key to the defense's argument. So in their letter, they write, quote, "While victim one may have privacy interests that justify keeping the videos themselves under seal at this stage, including details of the content of the videos, the fact that victim one was filmed while participating in the so-called freak-offs is public information. Indeed, the government has publicized that these were extended sex acts with male commercial sex workers and elaborate and produced sex performances that were electronically recorded. The government has publicized gratuitous details, including the use of baby oil, lubricant, extra linens and lighting, room damage, and delivery of IV fluids. The government even held a press conference publicizing the seizure of more than 1,000 bottles of personal lubricant and baby oil. And the government has publicly asserted that during the freak-offs, alleged victims were subjected to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse, including being hit, kicked, and dragged, and that alleged victim claims are corroborated by videos of the freak-offs. Faulting the defense for characterizing that same evidence as exculpatory and consensual is an unfair double standard and demonstrates the government's intent to mislead the public and the court. To accept the government's broad reading of the protective order would turn it into a tool to shield the public from any interpretation of the evidence that could be favorable to Mr. Combs, after the government has been able to tout its own inculpatory interpretation. The result will be an unfairly polluted jury pool, manufactured by the government's misleading narrative and widely disseminated by the press. So the question becomes, how much will be revealed about these tapes, either before trial or even during trial? And you wonder how much a jury will be sitting there being shown these tapes, looking to see if there's illegal or consensual activity going on. And also, by the way, what's the reporting going to look like from inside that courtroom, right? No cameras are going to be allowed, but the reporters will presumably be front and center watching these videos because there'll be exhibits during this trial, videos of the alleged freak-offs. But I think it is fair to say that the government is not and cannot, in order to prove their case, rely solely on the tapes of the freak-offs, right? They have to have more corroborating information, whether it's witness testimony, whether it's the victim's testimony. There needs to be more to show that this isn't just group sex, but that it was forced, that it was coerced, that there was an element of violence or fear, that these sex acts were done through illegal means for Sean Combs' pleasure. We'll see what happens. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.